And a mentor said to me, follow your compass, not your clock. Those words and that advice reshaped my career, but I think more importantly, my life.
We recognize genius wherever it exists. And if you're known by the company you keep, we are proud to not only spotlight the women that are part of Rockefeller Capital Management's unique network, but also welcome our brilliant audience members.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Esposito, head of Rockefeller's Enterprise Client Coverage Group, and welcome back to Genius Loves Company. Everyone has a story to tell, and we're excited to hear those from some of Rockefeller's top private advisors, investors, senior leaders, board members, and women in our broader network about the life and career experiences that got them here and the insights and perspectives they've gained along the way. I am thrilled to have joining me today Andrea Jung, President and CEO of Grameen America, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women who live in poverty build small businesses to create better lives for their families. Andrea is a force. She is a trailblazer for women in business, including myself, having served as chairman and CEO of Avon, the first woman to hold those positions for over a decade. During her tenure there, she was responsible for developing and expanding economic earnings opportunities for over 6 million women in more than 100 countries. She has been consistently ranked among the top leaders on lists including Fortune's Most Powerful Women in Business, Forbes' Most Powerful Women in the World, and the Financial Times Top Women in World Business, and lauded globally for her pursuit of public-private partnerships to end violence against women and to stem the breast cancer epidemic. And the list goes on and on. Not only are we fortunate at Rockefeller Capital Management to have Andrea sitting on our board of directors, but Andrea also serves on the boards of Apple, Unilever, and Wayfair. Andrea, I'm so delighted to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Laura. It's just wonderful to be with you.
So, Andrea, we normally like to take these conversations kind of back to the beginning, since our audience is very interested in the journey of the extraordinary women that we feature on the podcast. And what always interests me in particular is, was there a seminal moment as you reflect on your childhood, as you reflect on your journey, that has gotten you to where you are today? Take us back to when you were younger. What were you interested in pursuing? Was it a career in business? And then we'll move forward from there.
I'm smiling because as I look back, I never imagined actually having a career in business. My father was an architect. My mother was a chemical engineer. But I guess I should start there because she was the only woman to graduate from the engineering class back at the University of Toronto. So I was really fortunate to have a mom who sort of broke through a glass ceiling at that time. But interestingly, it was very difficult once she graduated with that degree to get a job because no one would hire women in the labs. And so she talked about it a little bit, but it's always been an interesting thing in my life. But she believed very much that girls could do anything that boys could do. I'm one of two. I have a younger brother. But when I looked at sort of the landscape, as a woman and as an Asian woman, we are and we aspire to be what we see. And the only Asian woman that had really broken through in our generation was Connie Chung. So my aspiration was to be a journalist. Actually. And after I graduated from Princeton, I got promptly rejected from a job at the Boston Globe. So that sort of probably ended a potential thought of, being the next Connie. And two friends of mine, Bill and Bob Fisher, who were from the Gap family, and their father, founded the Gap, had gone to the Bloomingdale's training program. And they were on their way back to working in the business, but they said it was an incredible training program, that it could really be transferred, the skills that you learned, to anything. So I joined a retail training program when I got out of college, but never with the thought, actually, that I would ever end up being, the CEO. There were none that were women at that time, but it ended up being, a phenomenal opportunity to rise through the ranks and find a passion over time.
That you didn't even necessarily know you had.
Did not know I had it.
Yeah. What was the passion kind of rooted in? Was it more about fashion, retail?
I think for me, it's always been the consumer and really having a combination of sort of a scientific or data approach analytically, but also just an instinct. And it's an art as well as a science. And so whether it was in fashion or whether it was in brand marketing, I think I always had an instinct, but then the broader leadership skills come to play.
Sure. And last question on this. The consumer, was it at the time, were you thinking kind of more through the lens of a female consumer, or was it just at the time a broad consumer?
Well, it's interesting, Laura, because I think throughout my career, I've been able to see this. And even in my later years being on boards, I mean, so much consumer purchasing is done by women.
Women, right.
And so many people making the consumer decisions, particularly when I was growing up in the business, were men. When I moved my way into even mid-level marketing before I became the CEO of Avon, being able to test the products, understand where women consumers were coming from, it is, advantage all other things being equal. I remember when I was on the Daimler board, the Mercedes-Benz board, there was a forecast that said that, 85% of the growth in the future, we're going to come from countries where women were making 90% of the passenger car decisions, and yet most of the executives and most of the engineers designing were men. So you sit there and say the equation needs to be changed so that there's an even playing field.
I'm jumping the gun some here, but it's changed some. Let me not bias this. I'd love your view. Has it changed enough?
It hasn't changed enough.
No.
I mean, I'm an eternal optimist on this front because I've been a student and an advocate for women at the top for so many years.
Yes.
And, I was the third woman to get a job as the CEO in the Fortune 500. And at that time, 3 out of 500, it doesn't even round to anything. So it's essentially still 0%. And, and it's getting better now.
Yes.
I think they're 50. And so there are some signs of progress, but it's 2024 and it's hardly where it should be. So I don't think the ceiling is shattered by any stretch of the imagination, but there are cracks in the right places.
Yeah. So it takes that representation, that inclusion of really being able to see yourself.
It absolutely
does.
To
visualize
to inspire you to say, that was me. That could be me. And so now when you see finally women breaking through in financial services as CEOs, of some of the biggest banks, as heads of the largest car companies. I mean, these were predominantly male fields, and the assumption that women could make it to the top just wasn't when I grew up in the business. But then even in cosmetics, the lion's share, you would think there would be so many women CEOs, but, minus the famous founders, Estee Lauder, Helena Rubinstein, most of the CEOs of cosmetics companies even were men at the time. And so, we've come a long way.
All right, that's a perfect segue. Let's really kind of hone in on your time at Avon. When you took over as CEO, you were so passionate about modernizing the company and implementing ideas and policies that centered on women, which again, made perfect sense because that was really who your consumer was. So what was the opportunity you saw there?
I was fascinated with the history of the company. I remember sort of studying it when I first joined. The company was founded in 1886. This is 34 years before suffrage. And it was founded by an encyclopedia salesman. And in direct sales at the time, every salesman was, in fact, a man. And so he was selling encyclopedias door to door, David H. McConnell. And one year, a friend of his gave him a little perfume vial and said, perhaps people will want to buy this 26 volumes if they get a gift with purchase of a perfume. Maybe you'll sell more. And so as he went door to door, knocking on the doors, and the women answered, two things happened. One was they said, we really don't want the books. Can we just get the perfume? And the second was, very, very presciently, some of them asked, could we sell?
Oh, interesting.
Now, again, it was heresy, if you would.
Of course.
For women to work outside the home and have their own independent economic means. But that really began the foundation and the vision of the company.
Wow.
So Mrs. P.F.E. Albee was the first Avon lady. And she was really, again, way before all that we're talking about today in terms of women in the workforce, women empowerment, women being an economic engine in the world.
Right.
She was the first Avon lady. And so to me, the founding change
Yeah.
in the workforce composition was as important as the category. People say, what did you sell at Avon? Lipstick, skincare, fragrance. The answer I would always say is the very first thing we sell is economic opportunity for women.
I love that.
And, 6+ million later, 100 and almost 30 years later, I think the power really was the concept of allowing women to earn their own money and to have their own economic stream and independence in life.
Wow.
And that really drove the strategy of everything that we did, from the business model to even the philanthropy. We were the company for women, but we were also lauded for a tremendous amount of philanthropy back to women's health, domestic violence. A lot of domestic violence stems from the lack of economic opportunity.
Right.
1 out of 3 in many countries in the world couldn't leave a situation because of lack of economic independence.
Wow.
Very linked back to the mission and the vision, but the concept of being a company for women, primarily giving them an opportunity to earn, was not just central, but became a love affair for me.
And how did you modernize, when I think of growing up, the concept of the Avon lady?
We had to modernize everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing that was sort of an inflection point was getting a tome of research back in 1994 when I first began that said, in a nice way or not a nice way, it's a brand, my grandmother's brand, or a brand for my maid. And essentially, that stark reality is when the truth sets you free.
Yes.
On the other hand, 1 out of 2 women in many countries around the world had purchased Avon. So the brand recognition was huge. Everyone knew their Avon lady, or knew that it was, particularly in the developing and emerging markets, the first affordable cosmetics brand that they would buy. It was 140 countries we were in by the time I was the CEO. And so it was an extraordinarily global company with huge opportunity to touch lives and expand earnings opportunities. But from a product point of view, the brand needed to be renovated and modernized. The channel needed to be rethought. Back in the early 90s, Amazon was just starting. They were selling books. Many people were looking at what categories could e-commerce actually penetrate. And there was the thought that, well, you can't smell a fragrance, you can't
online. Try a lipstick
you can't,
on.
and there's, 50 shades of red or pink. So no one's going to buy this category online. And lo and behold, I think as we see today, be it social media or be it e-commerce, cosmetics is a huge and booming category.
How was it being a leader through that period, thinking about, now in hindsight, of course, we see how transformative it was.
I mean, I remember getting a piece of advice one time that was just seminal, which was, you've got to fire yourself on Friday and rehire yourself on Monday with very fresh eyes, and be able to look at the strategies that have been in place for many years, even some that you've put in yourself, and turn them upside down. Because the world is changing fast. Industries are changing, channels are changing. And if you are slightly behind, it could be game, set, match. I think it is true in every category today. I mean, the speed of transformation, and we all look at it today, but whether it was the internet back then, or whether it was mass retail and, the Walmarts and the Sam's Clubs and Target, or whether it's AI, it just comes at a rapid speed. And as a leader, you have to be able to be flexible, to be humble, and to pivot very, very quickly.
Were those innate skills to you?
I think, yes. I mean, that part of them were innate, but you have to be intentional and committed to having that discipline of saying, if somebody else came in here who was, younger or from, a digital company, how would he or she look at this? What would they say and what would they do? And can I make the same changes? But I've got the experience. I know what all the issues are. If I can, again, transform myself first as a leader, that's the fastest way to transform a company. But you have to transform your own leadership skills. Look at it with eyes very wide open.
Yeah, and very fresh, as you said, with flexibility and little to no ego. As you said, you were changing things that you might have just put in place and kind of gotten people to buy into.
Strategies and people sometimes, relationships and or strategies that you've been part of, bought into, and change is hard. That's just the part of the human condition. But leadership means really not just managing. Not just managing processes and managing people, but taking the tough, often courageous, often not easy decisions as well. Those are the critical aspects of leadership.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So well said. Obviously, you've been such a prolific leader in what you've done in the for-profit space. And a lot of that, as we're learning more about in this interview, there was so much that you were doing in the nonprofit space around empowering women as well during your time in Avon. But you now lead Grameen America. So let's shift gears a little bit. It's one of the most well-known microfinance organizations in the country and the globe. What was the transition like going from for-profit on a day-to-day basis to nonprofit?
It was a crazy transition on the one hand, but if I go all the way back again, getting out of college, I actually wanted to join the Peace Corps or do something very idealistic. But at that time, my parents were, you need to get a job. And I often thought that there was sort of 180 degrees between choosing, if you would, nonprofit work or more idealistic, give back to the community work and actually a for-profit job. Interestingly, and I found that through my time at Avon, that having purpose in the work is really critical. It becomes then not just a job or a career, but then it can become a vocation and a passion. And the concept of empowering women was something that I knew would not leave me in my life post-retiring from a public company CEO-ship. And so for me, while a lot of my peers might have gone to private equity or done some, other things that retiring CEOs do, I knew I wanted to give back still to women. And I had met Muhammad Yunus, who won the Nobel Prize 40 plus years ago, for the very simple but powerful thought that empowering women through microcredit in a country that was the poorest on earth, but where 51% of the population was shut out of the financial ecosystem, was one of the biggest reasons that the poorest country could not economically move itself forward. And so he lobbied. He was an economist and a professor, not a banker, but he lobbied very hard for financial reform to allow, from a gender point of view, equity in lending, believing that access to capital is a basic human right. He did not get far. So he opened his own bank, which was the Grameen Bank back in Bangladesh many years ago. And very interestingly, Laura, the early days of going out and trying to lend small amounts of money to women, he actually had women say to him, I'm not sure I understand the language of finance. Ask my husband. I don't really understand. And he, which I think was the essence of winning the Nobel Prize, said that is history speaking. That is a legacy of the country and the system, but it is not the human legacy. You can be an entrepreneur and you can establish your own credit just as well as your husband or any man. But we're just going to give you the tools and the skills to do it.
So much about education.
It's so much about education and just confidence. If we sell you a chicken and that chicken lays eggs and you sell them back, you've established and you've just earned credit once you pay us back, and it's your own credit. Again, 40 plus years later, microfinance has been a major poverty alleviation tool all around the world, particularly for women. And the concept that it would actually work here in the United States was something that was really looked at with a tremendous amount of skepticism a couple decades ago.
Thinking this applies to emerging or developing countries. It applies to emerging markets.
It's fine for Bangladesh and India and Africa.
But how could it be here?
We're here in the United States. We're here in New York, the financial capital of the world, in a developed market where why in the world would we need to give out small loans? What could you possibly do with $2,500, $5,000 in the United States? And the answer 10 years plus later is an extraordinarily fast-growing opportunity to give women, particularly women in lower income communities, entrepreneurship capital that they need, that they're not able to access from the formal capital system. And we have now served over 200,000 women entrepreneurs in 36 locations, 22 cities across the United States. And they are paying back, these are non-recourse, non-collateralized loans at an astounding 99.6%.
Wow.
99.6%, which is a testament really to not only their resilience, but their loyalty and their gratitude for the capital that they can't access. I met a woman during the pandemic who had 2 restaurants, but she wasn't able to access a PPP loan or any capital. She was denied loans from the formal lending system. She got loans from Grameen at the time. We helped her reopen her 2 restaurants, and she's got a burgeoning business outside Newark, New Jersey. But again, with the absence of this, it would have been, like it was for many, a very, very difficult time, not just for her businesses, but then for her family, going through the 2020 to 2022 period for many small business owners.
Yeah, sure, of course.
So it's been inspirational and in many ways just a few degrees separation from the work that I was doing at Avon, because it's equally about women and empowerment and belief that they can, in fact, run their own businesses.
So perfect transition then, take it a step further to your work as a board member for Rockefeller Capital Management, and where a lot of what we talk about is financial education that we provide for many of our families, for next generations. But so much of that is so critical for women.
Absolutely. I am so proud of the work that the firm is doing to educate families, the next gen. I mean, it is the future. And there is a, almost outsized need to have this education for women at every tier. Wealth management has to look at a very important statistic. Women are outliving men.
Yes.
They are making many of the financial decisions before they even get into estate planning and, in later years. And the thought that is no different than the story I told you in Bangladesh, where women were saying, I'm not sure I'm comfortable making these decisions, in 2024. I just love that Rockefeller Capital Management is believing that, women can make all the same critically important decisions. The number of women-led teams that the firm has is not just impressive, but these are incredible rock star advisors. So I think that this commitment to helping women understand financial inclusion and the pathway to really managing their finances and what is right for their families, it's so essential. And I'm very, very confident and optimistic that I think there's a unique advantage that we have at RCM
Absolutely.
to do that.
Well, thank you for contributing to that, because it's so important having you on the board, and Shelley Lazarus, by the way, who we've had on the program before. But I mean, it's so preposterous to me when you think about the fact that, as you were even talking about your experience at Daimler, and obviously your experience at Avon, when so many of the day-to-day consumer decisions are being made by women, and yet kind of the full holistic financial health and wellness of the family, for whatever reason, has kind of always been historically, and I'm generalizing, but relegated to the man, to the husband or the male partner. I am so honored that we are contributing to changing that dialogue and helping women have the right tools, and certainly what you are doing at Grameen.
I think it's an inflection point, and I think that is where the firm can come and play a really critical role at a time when, the change has to happen. It hasn't happened fast enough, whether it's in the boardroom, whether it's at the top of companies, whether it's in asset management, whether, it's in access to capital. When you just look at the data and the facts, and you look at where the population growth is and who are making the decisions, when you look at the fact in the Grameen world, I think since the pandemic, more businesses have been opened by women than men since 2022. And yet, if there was equal pay, equal representation, equal access to capital, the actual GDP grows by trillions of dollars.
Right.
Just from equalizing. It doesn't have to be a tilted playing field, just simply an equal playing field. And the amount of economic growth globally is extraordinary.
Yeah, the potential
so
is
the potential is huge. There's the economic case to be made in this country and around the world for allowing women to participate at every level.
No, and just
in the decisions, as you
right.
said, whether it's in asset management, whether it's in wealth management, it just is the smart and the right thing to do.
Right. And just incrementally growing the pie so everyone benefits.
Absolutely.
Let's shift gears a little bit, because you've been very vocal. You have so eloquently and emphatically spoken about the significance of having mentors throughout your career. So what have you learned, either from being a mentee or as a mentor yourself, that has had the greatest impact? That's a tough one, making you whittle this down to one so you can talk through a couple.
One is hard. I feel like I've lived a lot of lives here thanks to some great mentors. And, as a mentor myself now, my reigning thought is I've got to pay it forward because there's been people that have really helped me along the way. So you want to be able to have them stand on your shoulders. And that is the definition of success when they're even that much more successful. Only one of the most important mentorship moments in my life was when I was at Avon and had been told that I would be a successor to the CEO. And I was preparing myself and being trained and groomed to do so. And at the very last moment, the company was going through some challenges, and the board decided instead to go with a gentleman who had been a CEO in the past. He was no longer working, but he was in his early 50s. So they decided to go with him as the CEO, and it wasn't like he was a decade older and they said 2 years and then you'll be ready. He was going to have a long run, so it was not in the cards. And I was offered, because it was the front page of the business section of the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, that a woman was passed over. And I actually got 2 CEO offers in the next week from those articles. And a mentor said to me, follow your compass, not your clock. And those words and that advice reshaped my career, but I think more importantly, my life, because I really took an inventory and went all the way back to how you and I just started this conversation, which was I never aspired to be a CEO and sit in the corner office. I did aspire to have a passion for the things that I was doing, to feel like I was making a contribution, to feel like I could lead and inspire people. And the company was going through some challenges, and I knew people were really depending on me. And I had a love affair with the business model and what we were doing purpose-wise. So I made the decision to stay. And he did not succeed. So 17 months later, I did get the job. It's a little bit of revisionist history because sometimes people gloss over that. But the learning from that was I would have made that same decision again, probably, even if, he succeeded for a little bit longer, because in that moment, I realized that, doing something that you really love, being part of a value-driven firm that you feel suits and is consistent with how you think and what you value, there's nothing to replace that. I learned a big lesson from that decision that really just shaped kind of making decisions from the heart, not just the head.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not about chasing, titles and all the accoutrements that come with it, but it really is about being involved in work that you love.
I'm just so curious. They were grooming you for CEO, and obviously you got there 17 months later than you maybe initially thought. But I just can't imagine, and maybe this is my ego speaking, but they're signaling to you you're going to get the job, right? And then you don't, and it's on the front page of all the papers. How did you feel?
I think that your first reaction is, wait a minute here, this is a very different decision than you thought. But it is in those moments where you have to make a decision, what really matters. And, there were many people who were saying, of course you should leave and take one of these other CEO jobs. And that is when I had to kind of dig deep and say, is it really the CEO-ship, or is it being involved in work and with people that I really do enjoy?
I think that is such an extraordinary anecdote, Andrea.
The other piece of mentorship advice that I think has also been life-changing was from Steve Jobs. I was really fortunate to work with Steve. I've been on the Apple board for many years, but for several years before Steve passed. And it was a life experience, not just a business experience, to be in the front row seat. I remember that there was a challenging time at the company. I had already been CEO a couple quarters, and investors were cranky. And I remember he said to me, and this was just not too long later, he passed away. So I will always value this for my entire life. But he said, fail forward. And he recounted many times that, again, he had failed. And he felt that those were the most important times in his life and his career in terms of driving the next biggest successes. The thought being, if you don't make mistakes, then you're not risking enough.
Right.
If you make the same mistake twice, then that's a problem. But that from one's failures or mistakes come the biggest opportunities, the biggest successes, and the biggest joys in life, not just work. And that was an extraordinary piece of mentorship advice that I won't forget.
Wow. You'll cherish that forever.
Forever.
Right. So as you reflect on mentorship and your network, for any younger people kind of just starting out in their careers, what advice can you offer them as they look to cultivate these types of relationships?
You have to be intentional, and it is something that you have to invest the time in because everybody's busy. Life is going at warp speed. The always-on access just makes it hard to go to that mentoring event or pick up that phone and keep that relationship going. And they're critical. And it's just an intentionality. It's not about hours and hours. It's just about the intentionality to, A, keep connected, and B, pay it forward. I know many people who have been mentors and then eventually the mentee actually has given mentorship advice to the mentor.
Completely.
And it comes full circle, and it's those relationships in life.
And that's where it becomes a relationship.
It's a
right?
relationship.
It's not just a
it's
one-way.
It's an absolute lifetime friendship and relationship, and it is full circle. And that has happened to me many times. And I think that intentionality and understanding how it is so essential in human connection.
Absolutely. We started initially, we talked about Princeton. So if you could go back to the early days of your time at Princeton, give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Ooh,
I love thinking through this one. I know.
There are no shortcuts. Nothing is easy. Nothing goes in a straight line. You can't cut corners. It may be temporary and look like a success, but to really have, whether it's, successful relationships, career, you have to invest.
Put in the work.
And put in the work and go through the bumps. That is something that I would tell my younger self.
Your impatient, potentially younger self?
Of course. We all are impatient younger self. I was at my 45th college reunion and recall working the reunions as a student. And I was supposed to be working the 10th reunion, which always had great bands. And, that was always going to be fun. And they told me I had to go work the 45th reunion because a couple of other students that were supposed to work it couldn't. They had gotten sick. And I remember thinking, oh, they're so old.
All these old
and there
people.
I was. So life goes quickly.
But, life happens.
And then the other piece of advice that I would give to Princeton students is also, bloom where you're planted, meaning, and it's in that same thought of you just got to stick it out. There's often jobs and bosses or situations which you're not sure that you love. And I think there's a tendency to say, I really want to hop into the HR office and say, I really am not sure I want this.
Yeah,
and
what's next?
What's next for me, or this is what I really prefer to do. But there hasn't been a single job that I have had, or boss, and often maybe perhaps not one that I have loved, that hasn't taught me a tremendous amount and have developed my own skills and business experience, knowledge over time. It's often from the people sometimes that don't lead exactly the way you wish they would, where you develop your own skills and say to yourself, you know what, when I become the boss, I'm not going to do it that way. Or some of the assignments, I think many of us would say that the assignments that we thought we would like the least taught us the most. bloom where you're planted.
Yeah, it's such good advice. And I don't know if you remember this, but you gave me advice like that a couple years ago when I was put into a new role that was, it was rather amorphous and it was completely new to the organization. And I wasn't quite sure, and I was moving away from managing a whole lot of people.
No, I remember that. And I mean, look at what you've done with this role. I mean, it's incredible. But having been in an amorphous role where I didn't really have the P&L and I wasn't making the decisions I was used to, I remember feeling completely out of my element. And I think that was the job that got me the CEO-ship, because I learned to influence as opposed to mandate. And that skill in life is at the end of the day the one that is most valued.
And you're right. It's not just professional. It really is such a life skill.
It is a life skill.
Well, thank you for that. I'm glad we're sharing it with the audience, because I was the beneficiary of that 2 years ago. It really resonated and it stayed with me day in and day out as I kind of continue on my own journey.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Andrea, this has been so extraordinary. You've been wildly successful in all these different paths. So something we always love to ask, where can we find you at 10 a.m. on a Saturday? What is weekend Andrea doing?
Well, I have the joy of having become a grandmother. I have a 5-month-old, adorable, delicious little grandson, Noah. And Saturday mornings at 10 o'clock, you can find me playing with him. That is where you'll find me Saturdays.
Oh, my gosh. There is nothing like a relationship between grandparent and grandchild. No. Oh, my goodness. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Andrea, thank you so much. This has been an absolute delight. We are so fortunate to have had you on today's episode, and we all benefit from your influence, your insights, and your perspectives as a board member of Rockefeller Capital Management. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Laura. It's been delightful to be with you.
Thank you for listening to Genius Loves Company. To learn more about Rockefeller Capital Management, visit rockco.com or keep up with us on LinkedIn or Instagram. This material was prepared by Rockefeller Capital Management. The views expressed of the hosts and guests in this episode are as of a particular point in time and are subject to change without notice. The views expressed by the speakers are solely their own and may differ from or conflict with those of other divisions in Rockefeller Capital Management. This information was provided for illustrative and educational purposes only. It should not be construed as an investment recommendation, investment advice, an offer of Rockefeller investment advisory or brokerage services, or a projection or illustration of the performance of any particular investment or strategy offered by Rockefeller. Forward-looking statements, including those presented herein, are inherently uncertain, as future events may differ materially from those reflected, and past performance is not a guarantee of future performance.